Good evening, everybody. Glad to be back to doing the Saturday night Bible study. It's been a few weeks, but I'm very excited. I'm particularly excited because of our illustrious panel, who I will press a button in a second and reveal to you when I can remember which button it is. Here we are. Well, I think it's only polite to begin with new guests. James, I'll even move you up to the top row. How does that feel?
Oh, suddenly I feel like I'm dizzy this high up.
I'll tell you something about myself first. So I've whittled down my podcast diet over the last few years to only be, at this point, 2 podcasts. And one of the remaining 2 podcasts is a podcast called Cooper and Carey Have Words. Have you heard of this podcast?
Yes, I can't get rid of it. This guy called Cooper keeps on calling me up, and we keep recording podcasts, and we put them up on the internet. So yeah, well, I'm on it. I want to know who the other one is. Obviously, I'm insanely worried that we're going to lose out.
I wouldn't want to do it. I could tell you if you like. It's Very Bad Wizards. It's a conversation between a psychologist and a philosopher professor.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds great. And I'd
check
be
that one.
for that. Yeah, definitely.
And I tell you what, I'll give you the opportunity up top before everyone gets bored of us talking and leaves. Is there anything that you think our viewers might like to know about that you've been involved in recently?
Well, recently, what have I done? I've recently written an episode of Shakespeare and Hathaway for BBC One.
Nice.
Yeah, there we go.
We're hitting BBC plugs mostly, yeah.
Well, no, it's not really. I don't care whether you watch the BBC or not. But I don't get any more money, so it doesn't skin off my nose. I've written it now, so they haven't filmed it yet, but they're going to film that later on in the summer.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's my first kind of murder mystery. Before that, up until now, I've been writing situation comedy. So Miranda and Milton Jones's show for Radio 4, and I didn't write it for him, I write it with him, and I did a show called Bluestone 42, which is sort of soldiers showing off in Afghanistan, so that's kind of my main mortgage payer is situation comedy, and then I do a bit of podcasting on the side.
And you've recently released a book, I believe.
I have, yeah, and I've shamelessly put them just up here. There we go. There they are. So that was my previous book, The Sacred Art of Joking, which is about how jokes work, how they go wrong, especially in the realm of religion. And then my later book is The Gospel According to a Sitcom Writer, which rather than telling you the Bible is funny, I'm hoping to show you that the Bible is funny by sort of kind of dancing around with it, really, and building on it, taking the old improv yes and approach. So that's literally come out this week, and so it is now available to buy in many bookshops, including from me personally. If you go to jamescarey.co.uk, and I'll sign it and send it to you. So anyway, that's if
you don't want your money ending up in Amazon's pockets.
Well, you can do. If you're abroad, that's fine. But if you're in the UK, you could buy it from me. I'll sign it, and I'll actually make some money that way. So,
right.
So you can tell that I'm a real writer because I've already mentioned money twice.
This is the most legitimate plug segment that we've ever had. So
well,
I'm enjoying it.
Okay.
Did I also see that you have a stack trace?
Say again.
You have a stack trace. Did I see that? No,
maybe not.
Substack? Substack. Sorry.
Yes, I have a Substack as well. I write. So all year I've been writing a weekly. I call it a column. It's usually 1,500 words or so, and it kind of usually intersects comedy, faith, Bible, culture. It's kind of. It's sometimes funny, sometimes serious. So I'm planning to do that every week now, pretty much.
The reason I mentioned that is because I thought it might be music to Lefempla's ears.
A fellow Substacker.
Yeah, I do like the format and the ease of use of it, so I've been using it for a few months now.
Yeah.
Just to kind of, I like writing about people in history that made big movements, but no one knows about them really.
Oh, so who's your latest?
I think the latest one was, last one was one of. Who's the guy who got slavery banned in the UK? The guy
William Wilberforce.
Yeah, so his main witness for the slave ship conditions turned to be a really interesting guy. Like, he's not written as much as Wilberforce, but he was like this guy who made his money in Jamaica and married a slave and had a whole family in Jamaica. Then like felt guilty about everything, so he went back to England and married legitimately in England and had a second family there and like kind of balanced both worlds. And and the thing is, all of his children were like hugely successful in everywhere they were, regardless of like, you know, like his interracial children were as successful as his all white children in Europe. It's kind of like an excellent case study how like if you just have good parenting, you'll make it. and like because like you literally have like the same father but in two different conditions for the rest of the family. And so just having a good father has like a great like look at this result for the offspring. Like one were the children of slaves, one were the children of like an elite banking clan in Germany, and both of them were like big and successful managers in the British East Indian Company and various other places. So he's a really interesting guy to look into.
You make this sound like Joseph in Genesis.
Yeah.
Where it's just like everything he did, it all went well. It went well with him. You know, there's that kind of refrain, isn't it? Where it's like, wow, this guy, you know, wherever he goes, he just seems to have this sort of magic touch.
Plus, his name was Hercules Ross. So with a name like that,
that's a good name, isn't it? I love a good name. My recent most favorite name. There's a guy who was a bit of a polymath and a designer. I think he came up with the geodesic dome, and he was called Buckminster Fuller.
Yep, I'm an architect professionally, so like I love that guy.
Yeah, and there's another English Civil War guy I keep coming across called Bulstrode Whitelock. It's just like, wow, absolutely amazing. Bulstrode. I mean, it's worth having a son just to call him Bulstrode. I have two daughters, and I'm not, you know, I'm not just going to have a third just so I can call him Bulstrode, although it is quite tempting.
Is there a feminine equivalent of Bulstrodette or
Bulstrada? I don't know.
Bulstrada, nice. Yeah,
it's just not the same, is it? I mean, that's yeah.
Now, Pharaoh, is this also your first time on the channel? I think
yes, it is indeed. Yeah.
Well, welcome also to the channel. How are you doing?
Yes, good. Thank you very much.
And is there anything you wish to plug?
Yes. So I run a art and aesthetics YouTube channel. I've just finished a latest video on. I've called it Beasts of Burden. It's all about the architectural usage of man and beast in medieval Gothic buildings. So if you're interested in the animal protectors that are outside Italian churches, and you want to know a little bit more, check it out. And
I mean, that's niche,
definitely.
But it's amazing. That sounds brilliant. What's the YouTube channel?
It's very like I'll send it to Lambda so he can.
Yeah, thank you.
In the,
that reminds me. Yes, all guests may inundate me with the links and such, and I'll put them in the description. Sorry, I should have done that before we went live. And Philopocrates coming in strong at the 5-minute mark. How are you doing?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm great. Thanks. How are you?
How's your channel doing? Flourishing, I hope.
Well, it's growing slowly.
Well, I think it's unacceptable for anyone to subscribe to this channel and not Philopocrates, because he does excellent Bible studies there, and more frequently than this one. So
and he also does nice little biblical sketches that I really enjoy.
They're very good. Yes,
he narrates and draws like biblical scenes with like really creative audio. I just like it. Sorry, I just like gushing over that every time.
That sounds brilliant. I love the sound of that. Yeah, no, I'm looking up that too. Hey, you guys are a really creative bunch. This is exciting for me.
It's a fun community for sure.
Yeah.
And do stick around. However, enough chit chat. I mean, we've got Bible study to do. So let me pray quickly, and then we will look at what will be. I think we're focusing on Genesis 40, thinking about Joseph. We'll be dashing around all over the place, I imagine. It should be a good one. So let me just pray. Heavenly Father, what a privilege to come again, look at your word and hear from you. I pray that this evening would be a really joyous time, and a time that we can appreciate the richness of your word. I pray that everything that we say and do would be glorifying to your name and would lift you up. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let me see if I can still remember how to operate my my little software program. Here are the first few verses of Genesis chapter 40. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in the custody of the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody, and one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker, of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. So that's setting the scene. But I wonder also if we should take a step back, because some of our listeners maybe not be completely aware of the context here. Can anyone fill us in on, like, who's Joseph? What's he doing here in Egypt? What's going on?
So, the famous story of Joseph being sold by his brothers to Egypt. As a slave, he works his way up, and then got Me Too'd by Pharaoh's wife, and then I actually really enjoy a lot of the traditions around him in the Apocrypha text as well, because they kind of mention his learning of patience while he was angry. I'll read if I can find it. Someone else can keep talking about what he experienced as a serf or a slave in Egypt while I look it up.
I could just mention the dreams as, like, obviously the reason his brothers sold him down a pit and that he was insufferable was that he had 2 dreams, and we're going to come on to 2 dreams now. And his 2 dreams were essentially, you're going to bow down and worship me, or you're going to bow down in front of me. And so I can't remember exactly which chapter that one's in, but so he's the youngest, or the second youngest by the end, and he is the oldest son of Jacob's favorite wife. Jacob unashamedly has favorites, and I've always found, me and my writing partner, he's not a believer, but we've always tried to come up with sitcoms, and we've not managed it yet, about a family which just shows gross favoritism towards one of the 2 children. So, like this, somebody who owns a family business and they want to give it to their son, even though the son's a complete clown, and the daughter is obviously much more competent. And we find favoritism really, really troubling, because it just seems so wildly unfair. But Jacob, he doesn't care. He really likes Joseph, and then Joseph sort of does the same with Benjamin when they rock up. But we're getting ahead of ourselves there.
You
Have I
really
bought you
want
enough time there?
You want to treat all of your wives equally, isn't that the general rule?
If you're a Christian, treat all 4 of your wives equally. I think that's if you only remember one thing from tonight's study, it should be that.
Lutemplar, you there?
Yep.
Have you found your?
I found something. The testimony of the 12 patriarchs is a fun little text to read when you have time. But it has this one little line of what Joseph went through. It goes, "For you heard regarding Joseph how he guarded himself from a woman and purged his thoughts from all fornication and found favor in the sight of God and men. For the Egyptian woman did many things unto him and summoned magicians to him and offered him love potions for the purposes of his soul. But he admitted no evil desire. Therefore, the God of your fathers delivered him from every evil and hid him from death. For fornication overcomes not your mind, neither can the devil overcome you." It's little notes like that. It's somewhere else it says, like, remember how he treated everyone as kindness, not only his friends but also his enemies, and how he overcame these pains. I'm trying to find that part, but I don't know what that is. But I think I found it. I found it. Now Joseph was a good man and had the Spirit of God within him, being compassionate and pitiful. He bore no malice against me, but loved me even as the rest of his brethren. Beware, therefore, my children, of the jealousy and envy, and walk in singleness and soul with good heart, keeping in mind Joseph, your father's brother, that God may give you also grace and glory, and blessings upon your heads, even as you saw in Joseph's case. All his days he reproached us, not concerning this thing, but loved us as his own, soul and beyond his own sons, glorified us and gave us riches and cattle and fruit. Do so also, my children. Love each other as brothers, with good heart, and the spirit of envy, and the spirit of envy will withdraw from you. And it goes on and on, but it's a nice little text how everyone every every one of Jacob's sons says their witness of Joseph's life when he dies. It's kind of like the text is basically a eulogy when Joseph dies, and so his various brothers give a little something at the funeral, and so it's nice. It's a pleasantly structured text because you kind of like you see the family gathering for the funeral, and you know, and they just say their piece and how they were forgiven for their sins, and you see a lot of hints of connecting it to Christ if you want to.
Should we carry on? So when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So as James, you mentioned, dreams is a real theme in Joseph's life. And I think this is a key admission from Joseph. And unlike a lot of the other interpreters of dreams, both around at the time and today, Joseph is pointing to God as the correct place to go to for interpretation.
Definitely.
I also thought it was interesting, Joseph's like super successful in everything that he does, and when people come to him, like he's looking after these people, they're basically his employees in prison, but he's worried about their emotional state. And I think it's something we can learn from Joseph's life, of like just the sheer power of being competent, caring individual in the way you live your life.
I mean, it is really interesting how there's a kind of a tacit admission, I think, that Potiphar's wife sort of does the Me Too thing and is throwing around an accusation. He's now in the prison of the house of the jailer. There's clearly some kind of link there. So it's like, it's almost as if, I don't know whether the captain of the guard actually, Potiphar actually believed his wife, but either way, Joseph had to go. So I think you can read between the lines there in good faith and just say, it's almost as if they kind of know it was made up, but obviously no one wants to be in prison, but once he's there, it's just amazing how he just basically starts to run things. It's really
there's a little throwaway verse in the previous chapter where they talk about how he sort of gets placed in charge of the other prisoners relatively quickly as well. And again, I love that attitude of the whole incident is so wrong, and he has been unfairly accused, with no one sticking up for him, defending him. But rather than complain, he just does an amazing, like literally looking after the other prisoners. When again, most people would just whinge about it.
Yeah, you can't get much more vindicated than having your innocence recorded in the Bible and then having people reading about it for like thousands of years afterwards. Back onwards. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forwards, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house, for I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. And here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit.'" What do we make of this this little exchange, the dream and then the interpretation?
In a way, I think we find dreams very hard to comment on, and both dreams and interpretations of dreams, because I'm not sure that we're that into dreams. And that, in a way, that I'd be really interested to know what others think about that, how dreams are incredibly significant in both the Old and New Testament, and there are visions and stuff. And I guess it maybe depends on how cessationist you are. about whether you still think God speaks through dreams. He doesn't seem to, but he does in the Bible quite a lot. And
I'm interested by the reports of people, say from the Islamic world, having dreams of Jesus. I tend to think that God. So I guess my take on cessationism, for example, would be if you've got access to the Bible and maybe what we think of as more run-of-the-mill ways of finding out about God, then he's happy to go with that method. But in parts of the world where that's not available, it seems perfectly plausible that maybe there are more miraculous things happening.
That's a really interesting view, actually. I'd not really thought about that. But yes, now you mention it, I have heard a number of stories about Muslims coming to a Christian faith through dreams. And that you know, and it's churlish to say, no, that wasn't Jesus. That's just something you ate. That's kind of, it's not particularly helpful. I buy that.
There are a lot of stories surrounding Africa as well, with the missionaries that came. I'm in South Africa, and there are definitely a lot of stories like that from around here. But also, more recently, I've heard some from Mauritius, that this kind of spiritual activity, not only speaking through dreams, I think that's a bit more rare in the accounts that I've heard, but simply activity that we as Westerners would consider to be like something from legends or myths or something that's based on superstition. These things actually happen, and then Western missionaries experience them, and it's a very kind of humbling experience, I think. So I like that thought as well, that in places where God's word hasn't yet reached a kind of dominance like we know it, that he works in different ways.
It's kind of a different way of dealing with the cessationist thought that there was miracles because they hadn't yet assembled the New Testament, and then you can slightly broaden it and say, oh well, maybe there are still places which are living in a effectively pre scriptural times. So yeah, I'm not super confident on that belief, but that's my default.
Just one note on this as well. And I think what's interesting is that these dreams disturbed both the cupbearer and the baker, and I think that's interesting. It's definitely something out of the ordinary, because these things don't make they don't make sense on their own without interpretation. But it was enough to stand out, and the next day for them to think, I've received something's different, and it's disturbing, and I'm worried about it. So it's not like having a nightmare in the same kind of way. So I think there was something definitely special about these dreams. If I could just talk a second about the actual the symbology of them, because it's quite interesting. So again, when you're looking at dreams, you can talk about the overall message, but also the things inside, in like the different symbolic elements. And again, especially in Joseph's prophecy and interpretation, this comes time and time again. But also something like the vine, obviously. As soon as I kind of reread this, it reminded me of Revelations, actually, because there's a little part about the kind of the reaping of the vines and the crushing of the vines. And again, the vines are they kind of blossom. So again, there's the kind of the growth, the vitality, the life. So again, kind of hinting at the life of it through that growth. But interesting, the idea of crushing as another source of life. But so there's that kind of initial dream, but also I think there's something quite Jesus-y about it as well. That's why he's associated with the vine, because it is crushed to get the product out. So it's one of those cases where crushing a destructive act makes something good, which I thought was interesting as well.
That's great.
It is a sign of culture, I think, throughout the Old Testament anyway. The vine as something that's cultivated, and that begins with Noah, right? So it's also there at the end of the first part of Genesis, and here it's taken up again. It also comes up in between, like with Melchizedek. It also brings up bread and wine. Yeah. I don't know if the bread is still coming, but there's, it is definitely one of these like messianic or cultivated symbols, if one wants to call it that, in the Bible, I think. So I really like that.
I personally do buy into the idea that these sort of signs tend to occur more in like the the front line of spiritual warfare. And I almost view them as like, these are like the heroic deeds of like spiritual beings, basically, in that field of warfare. You wouldn't see acts of heroism in peacetime places, or in like purely under enemy occupation too. I've definitely leaned more towards cessationism for sure, but I can't deny that I've had a dream or two that directed me to better choices than I could have had, including one which was interesting. I come from half of my family comes from a more Slavic background, and there are like in that part of the world there are dream dictionaries, if you will, where like they kind of have like a dictionary of, if you have this dream it means this. It's quite well documented, and it's not only in like places like Russia. This stretches more into like China and Korea and Japan too. There are these like, I think it was probably spread along with the Mongolian conquest that this view is spread with, and I'm aware of it possibly having some Nestorian origins, possibly. But for example, in what my grandmother taught me is that, you know, if you dream that your teeth are falling out, it indicates that there's something related to like health going to happen soon in your life. And you know, they're kind of like almost like a you know, the East's version of astrology, basically. It's like, you know, instead of stars, you're dealing with dreams, and so that part of me always makes me doubt it, basically, because it's a bit of a relic from the pagan era. Nonetheless, like I can't deny that, like, you know, I in my freshman year of undergrad, I had a dream of someone else's teeth falling out, and then next day they were missing from class.
Punched them. Oh,
no. Next day they were missing from class, and we were all like, "Where are they?" And turned out they had gotten into a big accident and was in the hospital. So that was interesting, because it was a dream not about me but someone else. So like, you know, I dreamed someone else was having that problem. And I have a few examples of that from my life. So I view it as, anyway, I won't take too much time, but like it seems to occur in places with like spiritual conflict, basically, to me. Because that person wasn't a believer either. So
I think we've always got this temptation to say that dreams these days have no meaning at all I just think it's not true. But equally, to say that every dream has a meaning is also not true. And what we love to do is we then like to both sort of categorize and encyclopedize what does everything in every dream mean, so that I can look it up. And then it'll be, the next step is, well, if you drink this or eat this before you go to bed, you'll then have a dream, which will then mean that you will become wealthy or this, that, or the other. So, we always take these kind of sort of soft links, just like with astrology. The astrologers found Jesus. There are astrologers in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. So, and the stars are spiritual beings. So to say there's no link between the stars and what happens on the earth is not right. But equally to say, well, if you're a Capricorn, then look out, because tomorrow is not a good day to be doing X, Y, and Z. You just think, no. But then it's very tempting just to go, oh, well, the stars are just flaming balls. And at this point, we're into the C.S. Lewis territory of, that's what they're made of. That's not what stars are. So I think dreams kind of fall into that same category.
Even as
not
necessarily as.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, dreams as not necessarily as something that tell the future also, and can still, I think, be seen as useful mediums, like with LaRue's comment and the other guy whose name I forget, but they are quite useful. That they are quite useful for like helping you understand something that is being communicated to you by your body or by your surroundings that you aren't addressing. I mean, Jordan Peterson likes talking about this, but he gets it from Jung, and I looked into Jungian dream analysis for a while, and that was really interesting. Yeah, it's because
the thing is, though,
really,
in this story, the fact that Joseph is able to interpret these dreams is clearly seen as miraculous. Like, it is an evidence that Joseph is from God, and it's significant in the narrative. So something like a basic rule that somebody could observe a rote thing that anybody could come up with would not have served the function in this case. So I think I would say in this story, the dream analysis is something miraculous and can't be explained by just a set of rules that you could learn about dream analysis.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because when the Pharaoh has his two dreams, they don't sound that weird or difficult to understand in some ways. And clearly everybody is standing around just going, we have no idea what this means. So that I've found that interesting and rather puzzling, because they don't.
That's interesting.
They're not really weird symbolology that's completely unguessable. But that's all very well with hindsight, isn't it? So
and the evidence of whether a prophet is a real prophet is whether their prophecies turn out to be true, and if they do, you should kind of keep listening to them. I wonder if what was happening was that the magicians in the court were hedging. I always assume that's what was going on, that they were kind of like, it sounds like it might be this, but if I get it wrong, I'm
gonna get impaled. I mean, who impales their baker? That's what I'm saying. That's pretty messed up, guys.
I want to make sure we have time to get onto that.
Yeah.
We'll keep reading. Yeah. So sorry. I know we're hoping
great. I'm loving this. I'm loving it.
We're hoping to get through the content in an hour, and then we'll do some more casual chat later after some people probably have to slip off. But when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "Oh, I also had a dream, and there were 3 caskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked foods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." And Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days..." Oh dear, what's happened there? That's hilarious.
The error. Just read it for that. Yeah.
I've crashed the Bible with a software error. Okay, sorry. Let's see if I can skip through.
In 3 days. No, I think something about that text isn't formatted right. We could just read it off.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go for a more traditional.
It's probably just a funky character if I'm reading that.
Yeah, it probably is.
Yeah,
I will debug later. Where do we get up to? Anyone remember the verse?
Verse 16.
Great, thank you. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, we were a bit further on this, right? This is what it meant. The baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Shall we pause there? So, poor old chief baker.
This is, I mean, in a way, this is why I said, can we look at this bit? Because I just think it's really funny.
It is very funny, and
I don't think it's just like, I don't think it's an accident. And this is, just to go back to my book, the Gospel According to a Sitcom Writer. There are loads of things I think in the Bible that are just flat out funny, and I think we are invited to laugh as well. It's not just that we happen to in 2021 happen to find this funny or whatever. I just think it is inherently comic. Even though obviously the chief baker didn't find it funny, but because what happens is, I just love the line. It didn't need to say this. Verse 16: when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "Oh, do me."
Yeah, I had a similar dream.
Yeah, and Joseph is just like, this is how it's going to go. They're going to lift off your head. What?
Yeah.
Okay, is it? Okay, I had another dream. Okay, I had a second dream. And I just think it's really funny that you just got this. You're going to escape. It's going to be great. You're going to be, back to favor. And the baker's like, my dream was really similar. It's like, yeah, you're going to die. And die horribly. Really, it's going to be awful. It's going to be humiliating. The whole leaving bodies out to be pecked and sort of all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's. They're going to hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat flesh from you.
Right?
So, wow, the dream says all of that. That's really specific.
There's some interesting parallels with this and Christ's own impalement on the cross. How one was given to salvation and one was given to death. And I always found this a little bit like curious the way both of the people on the cross with Jesus asked for well, one of them sought Jesus for salvation. The other one sought to like insult him like as a gimmick. There might be some parallels there.
Yeah.
And also because he's the bread of heaven. I think that's also a really cool parallel that the bread is being eaten here, and that's what he also says about his own body. This is my body.
Yeah.
Genesis is just so rich, isn't it? It's just dense with like symbols and meaning, but also like emotions, like you say. You could just imagine if you were shooting this, you'd probably have the baker do a sort of fourth wall break, look to camera kind of
Yes,
expression, wouldn't it?
Unbelievable. Yeah, that would be. It's or I look to the audience. It's like, are you getting this?
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, boy, I don't half pick them. You know,
Right.
it's real. Yeah, I know what you mean. But I just think if you were filming this, it would be hard for this not to be funny. You'd actually have to work quite hard to make this legitimately serious. It would just be, if you're cutting with the grain of this passage, I just think it's a comic passage. And in a way, I my overall point is, I think I'm always excited when things like this are comic, and it doesn't detract from the true meaning of them. And all of those things that we've been saying about the fact that it was a baker, and then there's bread, and there's broken, and the thieves on the cross. It's like, I'm into all of that. You know, I'm open to all of those things as well.
Yeah.
It was still funny.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, if you'd been there, you I mean, it would have been embarrassing if there'd been a fourth person there. You know, he'd just be like, oh wow, this is awkward. Anyway, your last meal's on the thing over there, so I'll leave you to it then, shall I?
It doesn't follow rule of three though, does it? You could imagine having 2 positive dreams, you know, increasingly good, and then number 3 is the knockdown.
Interesting. I did the bit I've been reading. So I've been grinding my way through Genesis all year and literally copying it out. I've just been writing out Genesis, and I'm now on chapter 49. I've nearly done the whole of Genesis, just because when I'm reading, my mind wanders, and it's just like, no, you're gonna write it out by hand in a book. In fact, here is the book that I have been writing all of Genesis in.
Wow.
You know, and I'm never going to look at it again. I'm never going to read it because I've got a Bible, you know.
Yeah.
But I've also been going through. I've been looking at Trees and Thorns by James Jordan, but also I've been using Waltker as a Genesis commentary, and I think it was Waltker who just talks about all of the pairings all over Genesis 37 to 50. So rather than there being comedy rule of 3, completely, I agree with you. And normally the Englishman, the Irishman, and the Scotsman joke is the rule of 3 joke. Straight man joke. Yes. Funny man.
Yeah. Once pattern break.
Yeah. So, but actually, there are loads of pairings all over. So Joseph has 2 dreams that escalate. He has escalating double trouble with his brothers. You know, Joseph has 2 sets of dreams, you know, and then Pharaoh has 2 dreams as well. And then, you know, the brothers make 2 trips to Egypt. The narrator twice tells of the family's migration there. Jacob does 2 blessings. The book ends with the death of 2 patriarchs. So there's just loads of pairings, you know, and I'm sure there's chiasms and stuff all over the place as well. So in a way, it feels like, much as I think possibly this could be improved with a 3rd, it wouldn't make it any funnier, I don't think. But yeah, so I think we just see these pairs everywhere in these chapters of Genesis. So I think that's why. And there's an element of this is a certainty. So Joseph's 2 dreams are like, this is going to happen. And then I think this is what is said to Pharaoh as well. It's like, because the 2 dreams are sort of similar, there's you know, I think basically Joseph said, this is happening. This isn't a warning. You know, there won't, you know, you need to do this to avert. It's not like a Jonah repent, or it's like, this is coming. So we need to prepare for it. So that's kind of my explanation for why there aren't 3, which in a comedy point of view, there should be.
Can I just comment on the one thing that's interesting for me is that the dream is actually quite ambiguous. And again, going back to the symbology, the bird is really important, because the bird can be a positive and a negative symbol. Again, when you think of the bird, I think about so is it Elijah being fed in the desert by ravens, for example. So that's, that's the bird with food as positive. But also going back to Revelations again, which does specifically mention how all the birds of the earth were called by Jesus to feast on the flesh of kings after he comes on the white horse. So again, it's interesting. The bird isn't necessarily a bad symbol, so I think that's why the baker is a little bit confused by it. It is a relatively ambiguous dream again, but obviously with a very harsh reality to it.
I've heard it said that Hebrew poetry translates surprisingly well. Like if you translate English poetry, which is all based on rhyming words at the end of sentences and things, you lose it unless you pay close attention. Whereas, like you mentioned chiasms, I wonder if it's the same with the comedy, that it translates particularly well. This kind of, because, well, if I go back and listen to old comedy, some of it stands up really well, but some of it I struggle. Do you know what I mean? Like you lose some of the references and things, but there is a certain type of humor that sticks around, right? I'm sure your book is probably more illuminating than my off the top of my head thoughts on this.
Well,
topic.
I don't talk about this specifically, but
okay, yeah.
Cool. No, it does. And there's, I mean, for example, there is that timelessness. So my favorite sitcom of all time, which I don't think dates, is Yes, Prime Minister. And that is about two ways of looking at the universe. You've got the politician who wants to do the right thing, but stay elected and to stay in power. And you've got the civil servant who's basically trying to retain the status quo and stop him from doing stupid things and doing anything at all. And so, the great literature, the great comedies, all this kind of stuff tend to be the force of this against the force of that. And there's this kind of simplicity to it. Even just like I recently listened to Gawain and the Green Knight, retranslated by Simon Armitage. And again, it's a very simple thing. It's sort of about, it's set at Christmas tide, so Christmas Day to Twelfth Night. And it's sort of about Christianity in the background, but also it's about the chivalric code. And it's kind of like which of these two codes are going to win. So I think there is that kind of push-pull, which gives that simplicity and timelessness about it. But I don't know. I'm just trying to sound clever. There may not be anything in that. I don't feel like, I'm the one who makes his living writing comedy. I better say something. You
got to throw out enough ideas, and one of them will turn out to be
absolutely. Yeah.
So somebody in chat's pointing out, I think there's some clever wordplay here about Pharaoh, and Pharaoh. This is above my pay grade, but I do like the idea that this story is not about Pharaoh, but is actually about you, Pharaoh. So I'm gonna read the rest of the passage.
Watch out, otherwise.
But I'm gonna sub out your name. So now the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position. I feel like, have I missed a bit? No. Oh, yes. Sorry. Let me carry on. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of the officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, I think that's a good noise to make. It is kind of comic, isn't it? It's sort of tragic comic. But yes.
What is the term of lifted up their heads? Does that mean like he let the baker out initially and then killed him?
It's a good question.
Because I'm almost reading this like kind of like a comic, like you said, like where he let the chief cupbearer and the chief baker out, like lifted up their heads. In other words, right. But like he gave them a feast, so that means the baker would have made it. Must not have been a good meal. I don't know what to read.
Well, the head gets referenced in the baker's dream, doesn't it, as the food is placed on the head. So I think there's significance about this. It's obviously like it's his birthday. He wants to kind of celebrate with a great like an annual freeing or whatever of some official that's annoyed him. I think what's interesting for me is again echoing to Christ's death on the cross. 3 days from the dream till a life and death moment. This almost like quantum moment. One person gets killed, the other person survives at the same time. So I think there's an interesting there's an interesting numerology in the 3 of the 3 days, but also in that life and death moment as well.
On the subject of lifting up heads, so there's this interesting, again, clever kind of play on words, isn't there? So we've got lifting up of heads in the same kind of concept as like Psalm 3 says, "But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the one who lifts my head." I think that's the sense in which the cupbearer's head is being lifted, but then the chief baker's head is being lifted because he's been impaled and like lifted up to be shown off as a warning to everyone else. Is that am I correctly understanding the little language play here?
The head is the chief part of the body, and so if your head is lifted up, then you're standing up straight, and everything that goes along.
Just like naturally, when you're confident, you stand up, your shoulders back, head up.
Exactly. And if you bow your head, it means that you're in reverence, kind of acknowledging that someone is greater, is more of a chief than you are. And so if the pharaoh lifts up your head, I think it just has something to do with he sort of recognizes you as someone who's worthy of standing up straight in his presence, especially Pharaoh, who's considered to be a god embodied. So I think there's a lot to that.
I was going to ask about the god status. I think Luther Temple would probably know, as he's a bit of an Egyptian historian, but would they have associated him with godship at this point?
No, actually. Probably no. This is early kingdom, not middle kingdom. So at this point, Egypt is more focused on hierarchy than religion. The middle kingdom is what gets a heavy religious sense. This is why when Moses is in Egypt, you'll note that the pharaohs have Pharaoh takes a bit of a backseat to the priests and the magic workers because the religious leaders have taken the headship after the intermediate period. So at this point, Pharaoh holds the power, but whether or not they view him as a god is a bit iffy. I'm certainly son of Ra and stuff like that, but I don't know. That era is more emphasizing the social hierarchy than any religious hierarchy. Just because they're in the middle of the desert. This would have been early kingdom, right before the intermediate period. The if you want to go by historic evidence, the sea people are starting to invade a bit in a few in a few decades or a century from now. The Hyksos migratory people are moving in, so Egypt's starting to get its borders cramped, and the desert isn't as reliable a border anymore. Just as some context, I guess.
On the subject of comedy, I also find quite a lot of chapter 41 quite funny as well. What do you reckon, James? I don't think we probably have time at this point to read it, but there's yes, here we go. So it's 2 years later.
Yeah.
The chief cupbearer is like, "Oh yeah, Joseph."
Oh yeah. Oh, I did. Oh, I said, didn't I? Yeah.
It's just so human as well. For a document that's so old, these could be, a couple of blokes down in the office.
Yeah, they're really fresh. They're incredible. I mean, I wonder if what we can't tell, I don't think, is the chief cupbearer did not remember him. He forgot him, and whether this was just, who cares about that guy now? I'm back in favor. Why would I kind of literally put my neck out for some schmo, for some Hebrew?
Yes.
It's just like there is literally nothing in this for me. But then obviously it's it's just lovely, that moment of just like, yes, there is someone. I mean, the construction of the story is absolutely incredible. And when I must have seen Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat, maybe. But the more you read this story through, the more you just think this is just an incredible story. It is just so intricately constructed. And it runs for a long time as well, chapter after chapter after chapter. And just the coming and going from Egypt and the brothers, and go back and get your youngest brother, and he's going to stay here, and Jacob doesn't want to go. And it's remarkable.
But something notable about the Andrew Lloyd Webber adaptation of this story, of course, is it is Joseph, through his own cleverness, who interprets the dreams. They completely leave out the fact that God was consulted or involved at all in Joseph's story, which is quite an incredible oversight, I would argue.
It's a theme of 19. Sorry, it's a bit of a theme of 1970s theological works of art, where they emphasize the man rather than the God. Also shows up a bit on Jesus Christ Superstar, where
yes, I was gonna say they're both like massive psyops, basically, to incorrectly indoctrinate just like run-of-the-mill people into stupid positions.
Godspell is the other one, isn't it? I don't really have. I think I have seseen it, but I didn't.
Godspell's legit.
It.
Well, it's like theologically it's okay, but it's mainly about the music and.
I just think it was just insufferably naff. I think that was my main one. It's just, it felt really of its time, didn't it? It felt like a slightly flower power. Well, there's Jesus Christ Superstar, but let's do like a Christian version. And you go, okay. I don't know whether that was a good idea or not. But we have a Christian version. In fact, we have 4. They're called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Just read them out well, and see how you go. But people's.
Well, talking of reading well, I do think that the comedy is a good way to make the point that actually reading the Bible poorly is potentially to miss some of the actual meaning. Like, you may say all of the words, but if your intonation is incorrect, should I say incorrect? If you present the Bible in the kind of boring, monotonous tone of voice, then you're literally preventing people from understanding bits of it, I would argue.
Yeah.
I don't think comedy is the only way in which this error could be made. And obviously I read out the Bible on this Bible stream, so now I feel very self-conscious that I've probably made this mistake myself. But we can only do our best.
There's actually 2 moments that I've experienced that. This is slightly off topic, but there's a point when everyone's going back to Jesus and the disciples are going back to Jerusalem, and Thomas says, "Oh, if we go back to Jerusalem, we're going to die." But I think you sort of miss the kind of sarcasm in his voice as he's saying it. You have to read the context of it to really pick it up.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go.
I was going to mention, a lot of people forget that most of the apostles were teenagers. They weren't old men, so they would be very whiny.
Yeah,
right.
And there's the other one I was thinking of was during the Ascension. When all of the all the disciples are looking up, and then the angel appears and says, "What are you looking at?" I think there's a really hilarious moment there. But if you read it in your boring Bible verse, you miss the comedy of everyone's just stood there staring at the sky, and then a couple of angels are literally just like, "What are you guys even staring at?"
I always think it's a bit tough on the disciples, actually, because I too. I mean, I've got a great big. I'll stick it in the I'll stick it in the notes on the side, but I've got this kind of, the Ascension is a really weird event, and I feel a bit sorry for the fact that they've just watched Jesus go up into heaven, and these 2 men in white are just like, "What are you looking at?" "Oh, excuse me, Jesus is just he's not done that before. We've seen a transfiguration, and we've seen him come back from the dead, and we've seen him raise the dead. But this one's new, all right? Can we just enjoy the moment, will you? It's that kind of, come on, you got work to do. Chop, chop. So it is a really weird moment, I think. And I think these things are, I think they're intentional. I think they do seem weird, and I think that's fine to kind of own the weirdness of it. That's kind of one of my central theses of the last few years is Christians are just embarrassed about bits of the Bible, especially New Testament. And we just go, look, if you believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God, then you're going to have to lean into this, because explaining it away is not actually going to get you very far. So I love that stuff. I just lean in and enjoy it.
Occasionally I've come across passages which become funnier than they ought to be. I think there is the opposite mistake where you read comedy into things that shouldn't be.
Yeah.
The obvious one to me is when is it Jacob, after he's had that dream about the ladder and the angels
Jacob's
going up
ladder.
and down it to heaven, and afterwards he announces, how awesome is this place. I always vision him as this like rock star, like how awesome is this place. But that's just translation.
That's just kind of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure kind of terminology. So I'm not going to argue for that.
So we need to figure out whether the comedy holds up if you speak Hebrew, I guess.
Yeah, to some extent. But again, if you're using, I think the ESV is a pretty good translation, and I tend to work from that. And I think in good faith, you're just seeing, because also a lot of these things aren't even just words, but imagine being there at that time. Imagine being in the room as the baker is basically saying, I've had a dream too. It's kind of like that one. Do me. That's not it's not, I think there's no translation issues with that moment. We've understood the moment. And then the forgetfulness of the cupbearer and all that kind of stuff is, and then I don't think a lot of the Joseph story after that is particularly funny. It's very emotional. It's really raw, and Joseph kind of stifling these tears and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's kind of really dramatic, and not soap opera makes it sound like it's banal, but it really is a family drama, isn't it?
I think this do not interpretations belong to God. The fact that that's skipped in the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical is really missing the core of the story, because I think it's really about the fact that Joseph, even though he's gone through the ringer, is even in that moment remains, it kind of reminds me of Job almost. Like he's got that faith that just sticks him through, and then he ends up, spoilers, way higher up than he was before his brothers threw him in the pit. And similarly with Job, like he gets back like 20 times, or double whatever he started with. So I guess for us, we should see this as an encouragement of, like, even though we are seeing our lives at sometimes feels like a low moment, we should have the same attitude as Joseph. And we don't know what God's plans are for our lives. We don't know that talking to, the couple of fellow prisoners in this squalid cell could be God's got great designs to use this. Ultimately, you can trace through all the times in the Bible that there's these little seemingly insignificant moments, but they're all weaved together into this grand plan of salvation.
That's really interesting, because again, it's that again, his moment of trying to help that fellow prisoner out then helps him escape later on, doesn't it? As the cupbearer finally remembers. So a really interesting connection. In the previous chapter as well, it says that literally, God was with him. So again, I thought that again, that could be an early interpretation of maybe he had the Spirit with him. Which I thought was interesting.
This reversal of fortune for everyone, I think, is interesting in this whole story, because obviously we really identify with Joseph in the sense of, we just think, imagine being thrown in a pit by your brothers and sold into slavery. Imagine being wrongfully accused of sexual assault. Imagine being left to languish in a prison. And how quickly things change in the grand scheme of things. By 30, he was essentially prime minister of Egypt,
right?
And then I think he was prime minister, as it were, for the rest of his life. But but also for Jacob, think of how quickly things have changed, because he's now in Canaan, and his father and grandfather have been greatly blessed, and now suddenly there's a 7-year famine, and this is all quite embarrassing and quite humiliating, and he's having to traipse all the way down. He doesn't want to go. Certainly doesn't want Benjamin to go, and then he doesn't want to go. And then when he goes, it's great. But you just think, and there's a really interesting. When I went through it, when I was writing it out, in the chapter where basically, Joseph shows him his dad, goes to the Pharaoh and says, "Hey, can you just meet my dad?" And Jacob's words are really sad and sour, where he basically sort of says, "Yeah, I'm not really that happy about the way things have worked out, if I'm honest." And it's just it's kind of, I just think, man, Jacob, you are the worst. I'm not a fan of Jacob.
Remember also that he had that hip gout from when he met the angel of the Lord.
Yeah.
So he had a chug down there on one hip.
Yeah, and I think they sent a nice big wagon for him. But yeah, I'm just trying to find that bit with Jacob. There's this great big long genealogy.
Chapter, 46, 47.
Oh, so then Joseph. So chapter 47, verse 7. Then Joseph brought his father in and presented him before Pharaoh. After Jacob blessed Pharaoh, which is kind of similar to what his father and grandfather did with other, significant leaders in Canaan. Pharaoh asked him, "How old are you?" That's a slightly old question, but "The years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers." That's a weird. Does that strike you as slightly sad?
Yeah, but Jacob didn't have the easiest life, but he does moan, doesn't he?
But he's the one who stole the inheritance. He's the one who tricked, and in a way, you read what you say. He's like, "Mate, you've lived to 130. Yeah. You got 4 wives, although his favorite one died, and he's clearly really, really, he never really recovers from that. I don't think, does he?
I always like to point out the fact that once Jacob lost his hip, he couldn't run away from his games anymore, right?
Yeah.
That was it. You had to deal with the consequences, man. You can't keep running from them.
Well, I read there's a really helpful book. So just to finish that thought, I've been reading this one, The Genesis, the story we haven't heard, from Paul Borgman, who's actually a professor of English. And he was saying that when his hip is basically, he has to move from being the active one in his own story to getting his sons to do stuff because he now can't move around in the same way. And so, that's not a role I don't think that Jacob particularly wants. But I guess partly because that's a role that he took advantage of when his father was in that situation. So I guess, you reap what you sow.
Yeah, he's really the one, I think, to me anyway, but also in the story. I think it's in the text, because he's renamed Israel as well after he fights with God, and that means the man who fights with God. And that's really a pretty good description of his entire life, is that from the beginning he's the one that's kind of not doing what he's supposed to, or slightly weird, and he's living in the tents where the women are usually, while his brother is out doing the hunting and so on. And he's the one that steals the inheritance. He runs away from home, all of these kinds of things. And then he gets 2 wives as well, which I don't know if that's so good. But he's always the one who's kind of doing what you're not supposed to be doing, and really eventually even ends up physically wrestling with God. And so even by the end of his life, he's just like, I've wrestled with God this whole time and still not happy by the end of it. That's quite interesting.
So here's my question, and I'd be really interested to know other people's answers. When you really grind your way through Genesis, Jacob arrives in chapter 25. And I would argue that there is so much on Jacob that you could argue that Genesis is about Jacob.
Ooh, wow.
I mean, it's just like there's the Tower of Babel. It's like 11 verses.
Yeah.
The fall of man. It's over in no time, and it's just really interesting. It's and so Joseph is obviously really, really significant, but Jacob is sort of hanging over that entire story, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised in John's Gospel. I mean, there's just sort of Jacob all over John's Gospel. So it just seems to me that although when we think back, we're thinking Adam, we're thinking Noah, we're thinking Abraham. I think Noah gets overlooked quite a lot as well. But, Abraham is the superstar, and then we've got Moses as the next superstar. I think we sort of, and you just think it's the story of Jacob. It's really, there's so much of it. I don't know. I can see some nods. Have I put my finger on something sort of, I've got to say something that makes sense at some point, haven't I?
Yeah, I totally agree because, we don't hear a lot about Abraham's youth, nor do we hear a lot about Moses' youth. But Jacob, we get the whole arc. His youth, his middle age, his growing up, his experiences, his family drama, his wars and peaces, and of course here at the end where he, the same chapter that you were reading, where he just ends his life by saying I am ready to die now that I've seen you. It's you do see the birth to the death of the man. I do agree with you that seems to be a core emphasis of the text, and of course so his name is Israel. The people group took the name from him, so this would be his the phenotype is what he derives from.
Yeah.
I
mean,
Oh, sorry.
I've got nothing.
I also think it is I think he's definitely an important character, and what's very interesting to me is that I like drawing concentric circles because I think that's a part of the way that the Hebrew texts structure things, and so you've got those first stories in Genesis 1 to 10 or 11 if you include the Tower of Babel, and then you've got Joseph's story at the end, which is about the same length. That's the outside circle. And then you've got Abraham after the primordial history. You've got Abraham, who's the father. That's also part of his name is the father of many. And then you've got Jacob, who balances him out on the other side. And I think in a way, Jacob is kind of supposed to be the son, if one wants to look at it like that. Because Isaac, who's in the middle, doesn't really get any screen time except he exists and he almost gets sacrificed. So he's also a very Christological type. But I would say Abraham is definitely also very important, but Jacob definitely balances him out on the other side of Genesis. So I definitely agree. I think he's the main character, the son.
Yeah, and he's implicitly in the background of much of John, but actually he's barely mentioned in the Pauline epistles. He's not mentioned much it just seems, I don't know, I'm sort of nervous about saying there's I guess because Jacob is Israel, I guess that does an awful lot of that heavy lifting in the New Testament, maybe. I don't know.
Yes, if you added up all the times when the nation of Israel is mentioned and included those, then he would win at that point.
Yeah,
but even in the prophets, he's mentioned quite a lot as the weak one that God made strong, which I think is quite an important motif. Is that the people of Israel is actually a people that only exists as a powerful nation in history because God decided that he would bring the Messiah into the world through them, or through him specifically. This weird Jacob character that's very duplicitous and strange. And so in the prophets, I think especially in Isaiah, he's brought up quite often as this weakling that God makes strong. So he's definitely got that protagonist feel to him, I think.
And you've got all of the tribes, which are the sons of Jacob. So there's a sense in which Jacob is the common ancestor of God's people. I mean, God refers to himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that you can go down the lineage and say, well, it was whatever Benjamin, blah 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 blah. But there's a reason that, I would argue, God's had the 12 tribes, but together they were all sons of Jacob. So that now I'm piecing it together. I hadn't thought of this before, but yes, I do think Jacob being the key character. It's a bit like you know, maybe if you were to just pick up the story of Joseph, you'd think Joseph was the key character. It's like if you thought the Star Wars films were about Luke Skywalker, then you watch the 6 and you go, oh no, it's the story of Anakin. You know?
Yeah. Or you in like the Shawshank Redemption, I've referred to that in various talks I've done, but you could easily think that it's about Andy, Tim Robbins' character, and it's not, because he doesn't change. He's wrongfully imprisoned. He gets out. It's what he gives to Red, Morgan Freeman's character. So I remember that was particularly obvious, actually, and maybe it's a similar thing. I was watching it in a hotel room in Edinburgh, I think, and just thought, oh, Shawshank's on, I'll watch this. Oh, he's about to get out of prison. Oh, cool. Well, I'll watch this to the end because it'll be nearly over. Not realizing, oh, there's actually quite a long time to go. Oh, the movie's not about Tim Robbins' character, because it's Red who is the one who changes, and Tim Robbins is sort of Jesus in that movie. You know, how can it therefore not be about him? But it's he gives Red the power to change, because that's what the third act kind of is, really, and it feels like Jacob is the third act in Genesis.
I'm not surprised to see LaRue swinging in from chat, arguing that Abraham is the most important figure. I would have predicted that to be his perspective. So I think that's what he's saying here, right? Maybe I'm misreading. Go on.
Just one question I had was around mess ups. Now I can't think of any off the top of my head. So James, I'm going to put you on the spot as someone who has written this out recently. But what would you say is Jacob's major mess ups? Because obviously Abraham, you know, he says that his wife's his sister. You have that whole incident. There's quite a few times that Abraham messes up, but I can't think of any time where Jacob puts a fit wrong. But maybe I'm missing something.
I think for me, Jacob's besetting sin is the reason he does what he does is because he wants the birthright. In a sense, he is hungry for God and for blessing. So that's why he steals it from Esau. And that's why he wrestles the angel, Jesus. That's why he wrestles the angel, but just to say, because he kind of knows where all the good stuff is. So in a way, I would say that his you know, his motif is he really values what God is offering. He values that, and Esau doesn't. And so he'll go after it. So rather than just making horrible mistakes, one could argue that his huge favoritism of Joseph was a mistake. It felt really awkward. You just think, well, what did you think his brothers were going to do when he just made it? You gave him this special coat, and you know what I mean. That felt rather naive to me, but I'm not sure that's on the same in the same class as things that others have done. But to me, I just think, to me, the ends don't justify the means for Jacob, but I can totally see why he's going after it. And actually, we should probably be more like Jacob in the sense of we are encouraged by the Psalms, like David, to wrestle with God in prayer. That's what prophets do. They try to change God's mind and say, look, I really don't like this. I'm not sure about this. Please change this. Whereas I think if we're, Calvinists, we sort of take predestination and providence together and just go, well, there's no point, can't be changed. No point praying about it. We say we pray, but I think we sort of pray that we won't mind that God is going to do whatever he's going to do. It's very much not the same thing. I don't know. I don't want to besmirch all Calvinists with that, but I think that is probably one of our besetting sins.
Yeah, leaning. Do you think it's fair to say that although it was common practice at the time, having lots of wives was also a mistake? Was that a sin? I don't know if polygamy in the Old Testament is a bit of a funny subject, but it certainly caused him trouble, didn't it?
Well, that story is quite interesting because Jacob kind of gets got back because he's deceiving in order to get the birthright and so on. I find it quite interesting because he's like holding on to Esau's ankle as he comes out of the womb. So he's starting right from the beginning of his life already trying to get this birthright and struggling for it. But anyway, so he deceives a lot, or at least in a big way. He deceives Isaac to get that birthright. And then it was Laban gets him back by deceiving him.
Indeed.
giving him Leah instead of Rebecca to start off with, and it's kind of a not karma, but something similar.
I always find it kind of surprising that so the birthright was given to him, even though he was born second. But God kind of goes with it, right? He goes, okay,
Because he wants it. He wants it.
got
He
the
wants it
blessing.
way more. Esau gave it away for a bowl of lentil soup.
This is something you see in the scriptures where inheritance, God gives the inheritance not by who's born first, but who desires it first. And I think this is something you see this a lot in scripture from Seth being the third born getting the inheritance rather than Cain the second born who should have inherited it from Abel, to Jacob and Esau that you saw before, and this continues even into in many ways Jesus being spiritually speaking, Jesus would be our brother and firstborn, and he died and we inherited the inheritance from him, his promises from his will. Something to think about, the fact that when the Bible talks about God's will, it's a bit of a double entrada, because it not only means the will as a desire to do something, but the will as this is what I'm giving you as my inheritance. And in fact, I might be wrong, but if I recall correctly, in Greek it is also the same word. And so it's a bit of a interesting concept that gets preserved into English.
Just looping back to your point about the wives, Lambda, I personally don't think that the multiple wives were held against any of them, because again, even David, one of the most virtuous people in the Old Testament, stated to have multiple wives. It was his infidelity and the murder of whatever his servant that really got him into trouble.
Nobody came to him and told a story about somebody had like hundreds of animals, and he was like, nobody should have hundreds of pets.
Although interesting.
Sorry. I was going to say the one person who did suffer is obviously Solomon, who again had way more wives. So again, there's a definite line drawn. But sorry, Karen.
Noah, righteous man, one wife.
True.
We don't do much with Noah. I think is mainly as a mainstream. Within the Christian evangelical mainstream, I think people find Noah deeply embarrassing because they fundamentally don't believe in the flood.
Yeah.
And it smacks of young creationism, and it's just all very embarrassing. So it's just like nothing to see here. He
did get drunk and leave himself uncovered. So not everything he did.
No. So that was afterwards. But yeah, it's interesting that his righteousness was
commended.
Very, very unusually high praise for Noah. And he was a man of one wife, but that's not why he was praised. But it is interesting,
right?
That polygamy is not inevitable.
I was going to point out that while the Bible may never condemn multiple wives, it certainly doesn't give any positive reviews of them. Like everyone who it seems that every time
trouble,
everybody who took multiple wives, the Bible makes sure to document the challenges that comes with. So I almost want to say God views it as more of an issue. Like, I understand if you're the last of your kind, you might need to breed a bit, but you're going to struggle, and I'm going to make sure you're going to struggle.
Even Abraham was like, no, your child is going to come through Sarah. He kind of reads very naturally to us that you should have only one wife. In the context of polygamy, you kind of think, well, why shouldn't he just have a child through his slave? It's very interesting.
Yeah.
No,
go.
The first person that does have two wives is Lamech, who's the son of Cain. Well, there are two, but like the evil Lamech, kind of. He's shown as having two wives, and he's also shown as being kind of doubly as evil as Cain. So therefore one can sort of, I think, identify a motif of the increase in evil, where people are becoming increasingly sort of self-centered or licentious. And I also think there's a profound connection in the biblical text between the woman and the sanctuary. So if you go to the sanctuary or God goes to his temple, for example, his tabernacle or so on, to inhabit it, and he only has one, and he establishes it in Jerusalem finally. And I think that's how one is supposed to see one's wife as a man as well, as your home, your sanctuary. That's where you want to live. in a sense. And you only have one of those. And it seems like human wisdom to have multiple. But the more you do that, the more sort of spread out you are, and the less effective you are, I guess. I think at least that's how I understand it to a degree. So that is a good point, actually. Wives.
Yes, there was some interesting comments there at the bottom.
Yeah, did you want to? There's a suggestion for you. The place of prayer in fatalistic Calvinist circles sounds like a great podcast idea, James.
Yeah, I agree. I can't wait to hear it. I'm not doing that. I already do enough podcasts.
The flood story can still have meaning even if it didn't happen. So no need to be a young Earth creationist to appreciate it. One day I'm going to have a stream where we get people from both strong advocates of both viewpoints. I find myself somewhat wanting to be ambivalent. Like I don't want to come down on one side or the other.
I mean, just to come back on the comment, it did happen. So it's just a question of, is it a global flood? Is it a local flood? And I think we don't like the idea of a global flood because we believe the science, even though I don't think the science is particularly conclusive. But to go against scientific consensus amongst the educated elites, people just can't be bothered with that as a fight, so they just don't bother. So I think the flood gets avoided generally, and therefore Noah is neglected, and the Noahic covenant is also, broadly speaking, ignored because we just can't really face those verses because we're already unpopular enough for a whole load of other reasons. But even if you don't take it literally, then it's still quite hard work, and people just I don't think they're excited about passages like that. I don't know.
I have to say that this whole approach to evangelism of like, let's be cool and hip and make everybody like us because we're just the same, seems to have resulted in everybody going, oh yeah, the Christians, they're cool and hip and just the same, so we don't need to listen to what they say.
Be careful what you pray for.
I don't think they say the Christians are cool and hip. I just think, oh dear, these people are trying to be cool and hip. They obviously don't really believe what they believe.
There is a way to view the flood in a way that is both historic and you could say old Earth necessarily, and that would be to understand what a flood is in Scripture when it's mentioned. In Daniel, we see that there are animals coming out of the sea, out of the flood, and this represents pagan nations. And in Revelation, I think it's the last or second last chapter, it's mentioned, and there was no more sea, to represent the end of the very pagan nations that these animals came out of. So the Bible seems to have this rather consistent sense that the sea is a symbol for paganism. And so if we were to attempt to spiritualize the flood as something that happened, but it's describing something spiritually, we would have to look for an era where essentially the Gentiles went on a mass flooding of the region and conquering. And this did actually happen around the time with the Sea People. Ironically, they were called the Sea People. The Sea People were a pagan group that went and just flooded the entire region, destroyed civilization, and brought everything down as if a world-ending apocalypse. I think there might be some thought to consider maybe the Sea People is what the flood might be. If you want to go with a more scientific view, I'm going to still tend towards literal flood of water. And I do agree with you. Like the word there for global in the Bible can and often is used to mean region because they it can.
I know it can, but just read. Once you start copying out Genesis 7 by hand and you get to verses 17 onwards, verse 21, every living thing that moved on land perished. Everything on dry land that happened, every living thing. It's almost as if God is saying, I literally don't know how to make this clearer that everything on earth died. You know what I mean? It just feels, I mean, if you read Genesis 7, you know what I mean? I just think I used to be old earth fine. I've swung towards young earth creationism. I'm not going to die on a hill for it. But it just seems to me that almost all of the theological problems are worse than just saying, do you know what? I think this kind of happened pretty much as it said. So I think that normally, but
I'm of the opinion that I want it to be true like that because it's just cooler. It'd just be cooler.
Although can I just say this is classic Lutheran coming up with a third position. Just make up your mind, Lutheran.
Oh, those milk toast Lutherans, just like Luther himself. He always found a middle way. He was just so agreeable.
I would just like to say that Luther was the first guy he started the Reformation. Okay, you guys just tagged along. and then you took it too far.
So we're not
Not a
we're not
third
talking
position.
about, so Wycliffe then we're not going Wycliffe. Okay, no, it's fine.
Okay, no, okay, you're right. I guess there's a longer history to it, but anyway,
Yeah.
I think there's one true position.
Brother,
Yeah,
I have a lot of sympathy for that view.
We've got almost we had one more Lutheran on, there would be a majority, well, not a super majority, but we've got to keep an eye on my denominations because I'm doing a lot of.
I want to mention that we're an hour and 20 minutes. If anyone wants to drop out, we should maybe
That's
do
good
barrels. I don't know if anyone is ready to drop out or you want to keep talking. I don't know.
I've got 5 more minutes and then I'll probably head off.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
How do we get onto that?
I don't know. But,
Noah had only one wife,
yes.
and he was righteous.
That's it.
And that's an odd. I think Noah is a problem for us because he really does seem very righteous, and we just think, how is that possible given how the fall had gone and how everything was getting worse and worse in Genesis 6 and the Nephilim, and there's this Noah guy. It's I think it's very, very puzzling.
Does anybody have anything they wanted to say about the chapter that we looked at? So Genesis 40. Did anybody have any observations or thoughts on the chapter that we just didn't give them a chance to say?
I think it's important to read the chapter as a lesson that we might use terms like "quote unquote" the problem of evil, but God will view the problem of evil as an opportunity. And evil is never an end; it's just an event that happens that God can work. And in fact, sometimes God even brings about it to show how He can fix it. It's hard because when you're in those moments, like Joseph was, you lean more to like suicidal depression. But Joseph maintained the single thought that God would provide, and he waited. He waited a long time, and people forgot about him. But he kept waiting, and he worked out. Even better than what it was before, but it took a long time. And I think if you understand that like time suffering isn't time wasted, it's time spent developing, it helps to understand why the problem of evil is a bit of a myth. Because when you get out of the suffering and the pain, you're going to be a different person. And you get to decide if you're going to be a miserable person or you're going to be someone who will still receive and reflect God's grace and joy. Even Jacob there with his miseries, he's in depression. He's still, there's a certain aspect about him that like, now I can die. He's at peace. He's reached peace seeing that Joseph is still alive.
Yeah. I also, just a very quick one from me. I think it's always worth remembering when we read these stories that God is ultimately in control. So there was no human way that Joseph from down in that well was going to end up being in charge of the entire country of Egypt. But it was small potatoes, or whatever the expression is for God. Like he can do a couple of, for him, very trivial things, give him a couple of interpretations, predictions of the future, and that's it. So whenever we despair about politics or the global situation, what's going on with the church or whatever, just relax. Like God's got it. If he wants to raise somebody up like Joseph, it's not difficult for him.
I mean, that we talked at the very start about Wilberforce. When Wilberforce began saying, do you know what? I'm really not sure about this slavery thing. And everyone just said, it's fine. Shut up. Sit down. And there were massive vested interest in it. And in his lifetime, partly because of him, but also his team, he had a very weird ragtag non-conformist bunch with him. But it was like inevitable. It was extraordinary how God used him and people like him. And so we just see things are as they are now. They will be forever. We kind of can't imagine. Just when it's a hot day, you sort of forgot what it was like when it rained, and when you're sick, you've forgotten what it was like to be well. We have incredibly short memories. Can I just finish it? One little just running joke. It feels like a punchline to me, and that's when eventually Joseph takes his 2 sons to Jacob to bless them, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Joseph took them both Ephraim on his right towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left towards Israel's right hand, and he brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head. So he was the younger. And crossing it, the old switcheroo, crossing his arms, he put his left on Manasseh's head. Even though Manasseh was the firstborn, they were just like, he's doing his shtick. He's doing his thing. It just feels, I mean, again, it's like, obviously, there's a theological point that's being made there, but it's just kind of classic.
It's slapstick, isn't it?
It's a callback.
Pranked.
I mean, that is literally, because what happens in a situation comedy is the last third of the sitcom normally is just kind of paying off a whole load of stuff that's been set up, so that there are no new elements in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 minutes. And so, but that's just kind of like, they've just put a bow on it. I mean, it's like, that's brilliant.
And those kind of tricks, as well as being satisfying narratively, also would have helped people memorize these things, right? They would have, a lot of Jewish people would have committed the entire book of Genesis to memory. And it's no surprise when you've got something that's going to be repeated that frequently and be that culturally significant, that you're going to find these just beautiful. I mean, I think it's art. That's one way of looking at the Bible that we don't always think of it, but it's just a stunning work of art that as literature can be. It's like it's got everything. So yeah.
Well, why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't a chapter of the Bible not be like an episode of Game of Thrones? Where by the final season of Game of Thrones, it's just like, what's she going to do? What's he going to do? They've got a dragon. She's got a dragon. She's going to do this. They've gone there. Every single scene by that stage is loaded with significance and backstory. And this is just some shtick made up by some guy. And we kind of, read the tea leaves of what's going to happen in the next episode. And with the Bible, we're sort of weirdly not that curious about, Jesus meets a woman at a well. It's a hot day. Oh, yeah. It's like, he meets a woman at a well. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, what? This is Jacob. Is he going to kiss her? That's like what, they even mentioned Jacob's well a minute ago. Jacob runs up and kisses. It's Rebecca, isn't it? I can never remember Rebecca and Rachel. And it's like, but it's just odd. I'm finding it increasingly odd that people are just sort of uninterested in, and they don't even make sense without going back to that stuff. So anyway, sorry, I'm just going on a bit of a rant here, but anyway.
No, it's true. Like the people, some people I think struggle with the Old Testament. A certain subset of Christians just love the New Testament because they think, well, this is version 2. Like, let's throw out the old stuff. But actually, the New Testament is entirely built upon the Old Testament. And when you're reading the Old Testament with New Testament goggles on, you're just seeing it like you've got X-rays. You're reading it even more richly than the people who were originally given it, because you're seeing, like, you go through the Psalms and it's like, oh, okay, all of the incredible things that this meant to the original audience plus Jesus. Like, wow, there's these things are just incredible. So great.
And in a way, this just to finish that off, in this book, I'm advertising somebody else's book, by my book, but actually this book would be much better, by Paul Baldwin. I mean, he says when he talks to his literature students, he just says, you start with Abraham and Isaac sacrificing Isaac, and people sort of go, "What? This is awful. This, everything I thought about the Bible is like, this is the 7th time God has spoken to Abraham. So we should probably look at what's happened in the previous 6 times. You wouldn't approach any other work of literature with just saying, here's one event, I hate it. Therefore, the whole thing is worthless. It's like, no, you wouldn't. Yeah. Just like in Game of Thrones, when the Queen of Dragons starts hosing everybody with the flames of the dragon, it's like, what's gone on? This is awful. Yeah, it's meant to be awful. It's like, because there's a context to it. But anyway, I mean, you guys all know this, but I'm just sort of enjoying the fact that I'm with people who get it.
No, absolutely. And I mean, all of our audience does not know those things. I'm very pleased to have people listening in who are some of them relatively new to Christianity or even just interested. And so it's great to go do a deep dive from time to time, but it's also, and all of us can benefit from restating the simple truths that we base our lives on. So that's great. Okay. Well, let's call an audible there. James, you probably have to head. So is there anything you want to say before you leave?
Not at all. Thanks so much for having me. I've absolutely loved it. I'd love to do this
great.
again.
Fantastic.
You're
very welcome.
My book's called
book it in.
The Gospel According to a Sitcom Writer, and there's a link in the thing. If you Google James Carey spelled this way, then I tend to come up. So brilliant. Thanks very much for having me.
Good night.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Yeah. I think she'll be heading off if that's okay.
Yes. Any last words from you, Pharaoh?
Just thanks very much, all, and very enjoyable study.
Good. Well, thanks for joining us. Say good night, Pharaoh, and maybe Philippa Critton, Lee Templar will do a couple more minutes, and then, or maybe we'll all end it here. What do you reckon? We've kind of drawn everything into a bow, so perhaps it is time.
There was something that I really liked what James was saying at the end, because it just made me think, like, God reveals himself as a person that has a history. So obviously, if we try to tell stories, all we're doing is we're trying to imitate what God does, and that he just tells a long story of himself. And so I find it really cool, that we find these structures that exist in the Bible, obviously, because it's like the story. We keep finding the same structures in other stories that we as people tell. So I really like that. That made me happy.
Yeah, it's just, I think Genesis is absolutely beautiful. I do think there are chapters of the Bible which are less poetic. I think actually there's some, you kind of, you pick up the unique fingerprint of each author, don't you? So I quite enjoy that there's bits that are clearly written by historians, and there's bits that are written by like lawyers, and there's bits that are written just by like, some mug. But the other thing I was going to say was I thought it was interesting, the comment that we skip over the Tower of Babel in a chapter, and some of the creation of the entire world is like very sketched out. I love the idea that there's loads of interesting stuff that we didn't get told just because it wasn't directly relevant to us. But like one day I'd love to think there's going to be like loads more crazy stuff we would never have imagined to dig into. Like Genesis 1, whatever you think's going on in Genesis 1, like it's describing something with a lot more interesting details than we get given.
Yeah.
Like it's got to spark your imagination.
Yeah, I mean, there are concepts in Genesis 1 which can sometimes make you wonder what they're talking about. Like, what does it mean that there was water above and below the earth? Because we only see water below the earth now. And like, what was the firmament? Was that a structure, or was that the cosmos? Because there's another way to read firmament as not as like, firmament sounds like concrete, but if you read the Hebrew, if I remember correctly, it implies it actually reads as like stretched out the tent of the cosmos, and so there's something along those lines. So it can almost sound like an elastic material rather than this firm material. There's all kinds of things like that. But yeah, I like the idea of Jacob is my favorite character in the Old Testament, because he just goes through so much, and maybe it just seems like he goes through much because he's the most well described. But it's just like that was being mentioned. The late life depressed Jacob is a surefire different man than the eager and deceiving Jacob. Because Jacob, the name means deceiver, or possibly trickster. So he's inherently a very Loki-like character, in the Norse mythology. Like he does stuff like Loki would do, and it just takes He just takes him not being able to run away from his problems, the way he finally faces them, and he just starts dealing with them one by one as they come, and it kind of makes him depressed, because like he's not angry about it. There's never a sense that he's angry about all the failments of his life, because there's a certain, in my opinion, there's a certain sense that it's justice coming up to him, and so he's not going to complain against the justice of the Lord, because he knows he deserves it. And so he's just like humble and sad and depressed, lost his love, lost his thought he lost his son, lost his land, lost so much. And of course, early in his life, we hear him like give away all of his goods to his brother, but like he still keeps faithful to it all. It's a character to study. Anyway, I'm rambling. But
he's almost one of the. I think he's one of the most relatable characters. Like you really feel for him when he's worked 7 years and then like, no, all right, I'll do another 7, I guess. But he has his ups and downs. He's not purely a character. He's not a simple 2-dimensional character who just makes a mistake and that mistake defines him and then he suffers the consequences. Like there's a lot more going on. I think Abraham and Isaac have a lot of significance, but Jacob's story is, I think, significantly more nuanced and kind of gnarly. Do you know what I mean? Like there's you can really dig into it and be like, there's nuance here. Not that there's no nuance in Abraham, but it feels like Abraham is almost a more elevated myth. Well, I say that Abraham has some twists and turns, doesn't he? With his pretending his wife is his sister multiple times, and all right. Tell you what, they're all great. I retract any attempt to find a favorite. It's always a mistake.
No, but I definitely agree that Jacob is one of the most. I think he also is kind of the. I mean, we've spoken about that, but I think he embodies the history of the whole Old Testament in a really good way, because Israel does the same thing. It also, after the Exodus, it comes back to its promised land, like Abraham does, and then it lives in the promised land, and then it starts doing all of these weird, deceptive kind of things and turns away from God. So I guess that maybe that isn't so much like Jacob, who's always wrestling for God's attention, but like Jacob,
it's a great point from LaRue. They'll all be in the kingdom: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Mm-hmm. We'll have to queue up for our good company to be sure. Yeah, I always imagine like, okay, suppose there's 70 trillion people in heaven, but you've got infinite amount of time. You'll get your chance to talk to all of them. But certainly when you get to, if you're having your random morning coffee with a random person out of the entirety of humanity, and then that person that day happens to be Abraham, it's going to be an interesting morning, isn't it?
That doesn't sound so bad.
I know. Obviously, take any mythical, imaginary description of heaven with a pinch of salt. I think sometimes people can hear a description of the new heavens and the new earth that can be unhelpful because they'll think, it doesn't sound so great to me. So if it's helpful, great. If it encourages you to strive forwards and run the race and press on for the goal which we're called heavenward in Christ Jesus, then great. We should. Doesn't it say in Thessalonians, like we should encourage one another by talking about these things? So it's good, but we don't know. All these speculations, it could be wrong. So if an idea somebody suggests is unhelpful, or you're worried about something, like just God's going to make sure that He'll wipe every tear from every eye, and it'll be well worth it in the end to be called good and faithful servant. Any last thoughts?
Well, I'm glad I got a new Substack to read through.
James report back.
Yeah, it looks cool.
I'm sorry I called it Stack Trace.
It's a new website
coming through. Yeah, and I need to go and fix this bug as well. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, I'd be curious what character threw it off. It might be just like a weird. You know how they sometimes have those like small text characters for notes? They sometimes add in random Greek characters or something that throws off the code.
I think you're probably right. Yeah, that's probably is what it is. Oh, I've just remembered. I promised Reen that I would advertise the event.
Oh yeah.
Yes, the Sildings event. I don't have a link for it right now, but I'm sure you can do some detective work and figure out how to get there.
Literally click on any AA video in the last couple of weeks and you'll find it linked.
Yeah, there you go. So I will be there, and even I've now been announced I'm speaking at it.
Huzzah!
I'm going to be doing a talk on. I haven't actually written it yet, to be honest, but The idea that I've had is to talk about Austrian economics and the Bible in some form. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe after I do my research, I'll be like, oh, there's these two things are completely contradictory. I'll have to renounce my faith in Austrian economics.
Oh, don't let AA hear that.
No, I have done a small amount of initial thinking on the topic, so I might, if I don't find enough material, maybe I'll broaden the topic. But I think there'll be plenty to say, and certainly I've found some other people who've written on the topic. So as long as I agree with them, then I'll share my findings.
Yeah.
So yes, sorry, that was meant to be a plug for come join the event, meet me in person, and we'll have a good time. All right. Thanks for joining, everybody. I feel like this was a return to some normality after, just because it's the summer and stuff's going on. I've had to miss a few Saturday nights, and I'm sorry to say, but I do value real life events. So I feel bad when I'm in here on a computer when I could be out there living real life. But then whenever I'm away from you guys, my beautiful Lambda Bible Studies community, that makes me sad as well. And it's just I can't be in two places at once. So there might be a dip in frequency over the summer in these Saturday nights, but my thinking is I'll probably then pick it back up to being regular weekly as the weather turns cold again. Maybe. All right. Thanks very much, especially for staying with me for the last little bit, Luth Templar, Philippocrats.
Yep.
Don't forget to check out their various projects. Philippocrats, shockingly undersubscribed YouTube channel, the hidden gem that it is.
I want to see that thing hit a couple hundred subs. That's a good channel.
It's a very good channel.
Thanks.
There's definitely people in the world. There's probably tens of thousands. There's probably hundreds of thousands of people in the world who, if they could only know of the existence of Philippocrats channel, their lives would be enriched. So
I should probably take LaRue up on his comment here and do a stream or something. I think that usually gets quite a lot of attention.
Yeah, let me. Where's his comment? Oh, Christine says thanks, Lambda and K. Thanks, Christine. Thanks for being in chat and joining us.
I'm trying to read that Greek.
Oh, this.
No, it's Lambda. Yeah, it's a Lambda.
Thanks, Lambda.
I read it as the
Greek.
Russian D. Okay.
Oh, here we go. Yeah. Can't you do streams like this? Oh, you just give it a go. I'll hop on my stream on your channel if you like.
Yeah.
I don't know if my internet can do it, but it should be fine. I don't know. Just try it out.
You guys do pre-recorded too, although people like the interactions. But anyway, and I'm just gonna advertise my Substack again.
Yeah, please.
Luthnight.substack.com. LUTH Night KNIGHT whatever. Yeah, I wrote something recently about a church by me that got demolished. That probably deserved to get demolished. so it was just shocking because I drove by it. I remember from my childhood, and I was very surprised to find a giant crater there. But I think I'm going to try to write about my next topic. I'm going to try to write about is possibly climate change and how it might factor into different economic strengths and weaknesses in the next 20 years.
Interesting.
I love to speculate on what nations are rising and what nations are falling, but I want to trying to find real data for it. But the problem is it costs hundreds of dollars to get the data, so I'm just gonna have to use secondhand sources. Hate it, but anyway, that's it.
That sounds really interesting. Well, I'll keep my eyes peeled for that. Also, Philippocrat, don't we have a stream planned for this week on this channel?
Yes, for Tuesday lunchtime.
Yes.
GMT,
So along with Black Horse, we're going to talk about gender.
Male. Yes. Yep.
I just wanted to make it sound dramatic. Yes. That uncontroversial topic for which I feel certainly fully prepared and like I won't have any second thoughts on any of my opinions.
Shout out to Daniel Marsden, he just subscribed to my channel. So
Hey, there we go. Good work, Daniel Marsden. Special shout out for you. But yes, I feel I'm in good hands with Philippocrat, and the Black Horse have been busying away on a secret plan. It's not secret, but they're going to guide us through these choppy waters and help us all to get towards a better understanding of how. What's the specific topic? Is it just men and women in general?
actually,
I can't remember.
It's male headship, actually. So yeah.
Okay.
Which encapsulates everything, naturally. That's the thing that will solve all of the world's problems.
Male headship, and then we can do female followship or whatever.
Sorry. No, sorry, that sounds terrible. That's not quite true. No. Female sanctuary-ness.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna press the end broadcast, because otherwise we could just be here chatting for like several more hours.
Good night.
Nobody wants that. Good night.